Today on Cosmic Disclosure, we have Sergeant Clifford Stone with us. We're going to be talking about advanced technologies. Sergeant Stone, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure to be here.
When did you first discover that the government had actually secret advanced technology?
We use the term advanced technologies to cover up the fact that some advanced technologies are not of this world. But it actually starts back at the Second World War. Both in the European theater and in the Pacific theater, pilots were seeing what we called Foo Fighters. Now, the Axis powers were seeing strange objects also, and I'm not sure what they called them. But MacArthur, he wanted to know what these things were. He considered them to be advanced technology, and in all probability, something that the Germans actually came up with and were sharing with their allies, the Japanese. He directed General Doolittle to try to find out what these things were, and he wanted Doolittle to do it as quickly and as rapidly as possible. Several months later, Doolittle came back to MacArthur and said, "Sir, here's what we have. We have spectators to this world event we call the Second World War, and they are not from this planet. We are not sure what their interests are. To date, they have not done anything to prove themselves to be hostile. It's like they're just observing right now. But if they are hostile, then we have grave concern, not just us, but also the Axis power." So MacArthur wanted to go ahead and get pieces of these. He wanted to go ahead and try to do something with them, and in this case I can say back engineer whatever it is we came up with to where we could use that technology within our own technology to create a better weapon system, better means to kill the enemy.
What did MacArthur find?
They actually found a damaged craft. Now, they didn't find no bodies.
Where?
It was connected to Thailand, but I don't know the name of the island. Later on, it became a air base from which we launched B-29s to attack Japan. But when he found this, prior to that time, somebody came up on an aircraft, a downed aircraft. "Hey, whoever you have out there, go get the aircraft. Let's see if they have any type of new technology."
Was that material significant in any way for where we're at today?
Oh, absolutely. The technology on that craft, even by today's standards, is literally tens of thousands of years ahead of us. We are still researching the material there because it's not something, when it comes to getting this type of technology, that you go and a couple of days later, okay, we have some answers.
Who did he turn that over to?
Well, initially, early on at this time, he turned it over to the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. And what they did with it at the time, I'm not sure. After the Second World War, the CIA came into being, and the CIA had under them what is known as the Office of Scientific Intelligence. Now, they started to look into these aerial phenomena that's taking place. They concluded that these objects were real, under intelligent control, and probably originate somewheres out in our own solar system, Mars or Venus, as these were the only two planets at that time we recognized as being capable of supporting life as we know it. So that's where they would think. They had no comprehension that they could be coming from other solar systems within our own galaxy or even other galaxies. We could not comprehend at that time that there was means far vastly greater than, say, atomic engines, which we figured they'd have to use, which would take days or even weeks, depending on where Mars and Venus was in relationship to the Earth. But there was an advanced technology there. We wanted to get that technology, develop it to where we had a working prototype of something, and then to avoid suspicion that, hey, something's going on, they're getting technology, it shouldn't exist. We would then go ahead and introduce it to the various industrial complexes of our nation and also to major universities. And we'd say, okay, this is what we worked out in our R&D and working with certain things, to make for better defenses in the future of the United States. So with that happening, they would go ahead and say, okay, see what you can come up with. Well, now it became a situation where private industry was coming up with the technology. Then, of course, the military would then borrow off that technology to make a better weapon.
So what technologies are we specifically talking about when we're talking about advanced back engineered technologies?
Well, let's look at the NRO, which still holds a whole lot of secrets. Yes. And the reason I want to hit them up is one big factor. The NRO, the National Reconnaissance Organization, would remain unknown to the world all the way until 1992. Congress didn't even know of its existence until that time. In 1992, a closed-door session of Congress was saying, people are accusing the Department of Defense of keeping information from Congress that Congress should know about.
You've been on a lot of retrieval sites. You also had acquired some really amazing samples. What did you bring today to show us?
Well, today, the one thing that I brought, which I was, after a little more than 5 years, I was ending my military career. I was stationed at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and they said they had a crash of an unknown aircraft. We went out to the area where that craft took place, and we even took some of the people who were learning to be military police officers, because that's actually where I worked with DEVLT, Department of Basic Law Enforcement Training. On this field, there were strange rocks, and we knew they were metal rocks, and we're wondering, okay, how did all this get there? They gave us burlap sacks to go out and pick up all this metal. But they had something about 50, 60 people in a line, walking, picking up these pieces. As I went out, I thought, you know what? After, this is probably my last time I'm going to have anything to do with anything like this. The laugh was on me, of course. But with this being the case, I wanted to have something that later on I could show my family. That, they're not going to be laughing at me about what happened. So I went ahead and looking around, trying to make sure no one's looking. Now, remember, we're together.
Right.
Well, I went ahead and I fell back on purpose. And everyone was moving ahead. Of course, everyone's doing their job, trying to make sure they didn't miss no piece. I didn't miss this piece. I picked it up very quietly, put it in my boot. I wanted to make sure I had something. And this piece right here, it's heavy. You can tell it's been exposed to a lot of heat. I know from some people who I have contact with and I'm friends with, some of the testing they did on it, that there is some unique properties to it. Mm-hmm. One of my friends at one time experienced a situation where it's not magnetic, but then it became magnetic. He had some pieces of a craft that they were working on, very earthly craft, but very advanced. They went ahead and they were not magnetic. Well, all of a sudden, I said, I thought you said these wasn't magnetic. They're not. I said, well, what about them? And of course, we had those pieces together.
So this was magnetic sometimes, and sometimes it wasn't?
Sometimes it's magnetic, sometimes it's not.
That takes a lot. It made
those pieces magnetic. It would also change the polarity of a magnet. And that requires a tremendous amount of energy to do that.
So the red is north, and this is just a regular compass. We're going to now put the specimen next to the compass to see if it moves it or affects it. It surely does. North is the red part, so we're going off north now. So that should go back to north. But when we bring this up, it seems to have definitely the power to change the compass. So now we know there's definitely some magnetic energy in here.
But there have been times that I have been around where it was just me and this object, and all of a sudden I felt that I was being watched. And I mean, I couldn't shake that at all.
There is, after holding this just for a few minutes now, I know it's going to sound a little weird, but I can feel it like vibrating.
Oh, yes.
Did this happen to you before?
Oh, yes.
This guy's is vibrating right now. Sarge, what do you mean you thought you were being watched by this?
I felt like I was no longer alone in the room. I felt like there was someone else or something that had an interest and focus on me. And like, you know, you feel like somebody's breathing down your neck. I went ahead, I looked around, no one's in there. But I could not shake the belief that there was somebody else in there. At times I even got up. It was so strong that I went looking to see if there was somebody trying to maybe fool me or something, jump out and say boo. I went looking for the person. But I found out something interesting. The further I got away from that object there, the less I had that feeling.
Sarge, are you saying there's sentience in this material?
I really don't know, but I'll put it this way. Maybe the Native Americans of this country knew a whole lot more than we knew. In short, the Native Americans, for the most part, believe that everything has a spirit. Mm-hmm. And from time to time, the spirit of these inanimate objects interact with us. So maybe they knew what they were talking about. And we are just too sophisticated that we cannot accept that. I believe that everything is interconnected. Living, organic, non-organic, we're all interconnected.
Have you ever been exposed to the inside of an extraterrestrial craft?
There were times that I had to go inside the craft itself.
What was that like?
It was scary. You never knew what to expect. No two events were exactly identical, and you never knew what to look for. I'd have to go in, and from time to time, the guy I always called the colonel would have me doing things. I wasn't a mechanic. I had no technical knowledge of anything. And one thing I want to make clear from the get-go, in each instance, every craft we went into, because on sci-fi movies, you know, it looks like they hadn't been doing their house cleaning. They were they were like clinically clean, like you were in a surgical room. They didn't have cobwebs, things of this sort. But the situation is that you go in there and you know you've just entered another reality. I mean, here it is. We have a craft, 35 foot diameter on the outside. This would have been in 1986, I believe. We went in, and you know, and there were several instances like this, but it never ceases to amaze you. 35 foot diameter on the outside, and you're awed when you go in there because you're thinking, okay, something's not right here, because it looks much bigger on the inside, but how can that be? It's only 35 foot diameter on the outside. It couldn't be any bigger than that. And it definitely couldn't be bigger than that on the inside. But when you go in, I can explain it now, but it's hard for people to understand. It was hard for me to understand when I first heard about it. But then you'd go ahead and look up, because I mean, you know, it was only maybe, 12 feet high, things of this sort. Yet, here it is. This was maybe, 40, 50 foot tall on the inside. And I'm wondering, how can this be? So we would go ahead and measure that. The interesting thing, you saw no lights, but it was perfectly bright on the inside. Not overlit, not underlit. You had no problem seeing. But then, you know, here it is. Remember, we're working, and I have to stress this, 35 foot in diameter. But then you have like ladders that go up on several levels, maybe I think 3 I'm going to say 3. It could have been more, but at least three levels. Then you'd have little walkways there, and you'd have compartments there that people or entities, and I'm sorry, I still consider them to be people within their own right, that would go in there. I don't know whether they were living quarters, what they were actually there for, but they served a purpose, but they were rooms on board the craft.
Was there a type of cockpit or chair or anything like that's more human?
There was a control compartment, which they obviously had, the way I remember it, there was like a control panel. There was 2 seats in front. There was a seat in back, and on back over by where the entrance was, on each side there was a seat there. Now, the control panels was unique in that they didn't have, like, on board a fighter aircraft, you have a control stick. It was like, I know this now, but it was just the impression at the time that they were controlling with the instruments they had by just putting their hands over it or moving them over it, and they could control the craft that way.
When you walked onto this craft, did you experience any physical anomalies?
There were times you experience things. For example, you would feel like when you go from a low elevation to a higher elevation, you would have like your ears pop. You would feel like there was a heavy pressure on you from time to time. And you would experience this when you went from compartment to compartment. And how do I explain that? I don't know.
Each compartment's interdimensional.
Absolutely. And also, it created its own atmosphere. And at times, you might feel you've been on the craft for only a couple of minutes, get out and find out that maybe an hour or two had passed. And I don't know how to explain that. Now, did somebody in the team know what that was all about? I'm quite sure that the guy I always called the colonel and his associates, they knew, but they never felt that it's necessary to explain it to us. They'd just tell us, you're dealing with a different reality. That's all you need to know.
Of all these craft that you investigated, were there any life forms on board?
There was life forms on a couple that I was involved with, the one at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. Now, I didn't go on board that craft, but I actually got to see the entity half out of the side opening of the craft underneath the canopy. I know there were at least 3 bodies in that craft. The other craft had like a Chinese figure on it, and in this instance, the entity was injured. They went ahead and there's only one, which is hard to explain, because I have every reason to believe that when they came to that craft, they were trying to get all of their people, because they're going to come and try to rescue these people. To leave the one behind, that was kind of weird and kind of strange. But we went ahead, we actually rendered first aid to it, and they moved it off. That was the first thing they did when we got on scene where that crash. That was the Wyoming crash.
And that was the only time you saw beings that were either dead or they've already been taken off the craft before you get there?
As far as them being associated with a craft site that I was at, the one I helped there at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, I wasn't aware of what type of craft it got off. I don't even know how they came into possession with that one.
Who is responsible for removing the bodies of these beings before your team gets there?
Well, a lot of times it may not have been us that removed the bodies, or the survivors that had no injuries to them. Like I say, they'd send out a distress call, and a lot of times their own people would show up first before we even got there. We were to stop and go into a staging mode if their people were there rescuing them. We were not to go ahead and move in on them. Why that was, I have no idea. I mean, maybe we could have offered assistance, but that wasn't the gang plan. You had normally two teams that would show up. You'd have the A team, which was the first one to arrive within the first 2 hours. Then you would have the B team. They had to be there within 4 hours. So was there a B team or an A team that arrived there before us? I don't know, because they never designated. The only time I had it designated was there at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania.
Was there any time a pilot was needed to take the craft out, or did they always just airlift the craft out or take it on a flatbed?
Well, we never flew one out. And right now, I'll tell you, the interesting thing about that is that you hear all these talks about we back engineered a flying saucer and we're flying them. Well, then it wasn't the guy I always called the colonel. This was an older guy, and I'm quite sure he was a scientist, and I'd say a civilian scientist because he didn't talk like the military. Anyhow, he went ahead and he said, we might be able to get a pilot to where we can go ahead and get him to lift one of these things off into the air and fly it around for a little while. The problem we would have is getting him to land it in one piece. So no, I don't think. Now, did we back engineer a specific craft that was similar to some of these craft, but far removed from the real technology that was involved in that craft? Did we do that? Have we been flying? I would suggest yes, we have done that.
With your own gravitational field, I just believe that they can do an unlimited amount of speed because you're not in this 3D. You have created this ionosphere around you. So everyone in the craft can do 1,000 miles an hour, make a right-hand turn, and they don't know or feel anything because they're like barely in this dimension.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole situation is that they're in a world all to themselves because they have that atmosphere and they're not feeling the G-forces that are being exerted. And also, you got to understand that there's something special about the craft too, because when the craft is going through these gyrations of speed, two things happen. One, they're supposed to be displacing the air around them, where it goes over the craft, collapse, making a loud sonic boom behind the craft. This isn't happening. I don't know why. There's no explanation for that. Also, when a craft is going that fast, it generates a lot of heat on that aircraft. Yet, the aircraft is not disintegrating in flight. And we're not talking 2,000 miles an hour. We're talking speeds maybe up to 5,000, 6,000 miles an hour in the atmosphere.
What did you personally experience from all of this?
Bottom line is that it was more confirmation that we are not alone in the universe. It brought great concern to me was that were we learning that they were not hostile towards us, that we were learning if we gain anything from gathering advanced technology here, it should be for the advanced technology to get us to explore other places in the cosmos. I already knew that we were a world in quarantine, because if we go ahead with our warlike ways, they're not going to let us go out into space.
How was the inside of the craft compared to the others?
Now, in this instance, you actually had a cockpit on top of the craft. You had once again, you had 3 seats. You had 2 in front, 1 in back. That, I'm pretty sure, is where they were controlling the craft from. You had rooms, but you didn't have that big bay area. And like I say, this is a much smaller craft. Even on the inside, there was no difference from the inside and the outside as far as size.
Were these seats that you've seen in the craft, the 3 seats, did they have controls on them? How large were they? Were they for smaller beings or larger beings?
The seats on this craft were much smaller, like for smaller entities. But at the same time, the seats were comfortable. They were what you'd call, if you sat on, you wanted to be warm, you'd be warm. You want to be a little cool, you'd be a little cool. They did not have like this. I mean, they looked like pure metal seats, but yet they didn't make you feel like you were sitting on metal. In front, there was that control panel again with the seats in front. You had, with the one in back on this craft, you had a control panel back there. And I don't know, who was the pilot and what the other two were supposed to be doing, but all three were connected with the operation of the craft.
What were the colors of the craft inside and out?
Inside and out, they were gray. I mean, metallic
metallic?
gray, period. The panels, yeah, they had different colors, the gauges and all that. Some of the control panels were control instrument, I'll put it that way.
How big were these
black
control panels?
They were maybe about that big, and in front of each of the seats.
About 3 feet each.
3.5, 4 feet, something like that. And
was anything displayed on there? Was there?
Oh, they had
anything on?
gauges.
Gauges.
And some of them were like the gauges I told you about before that seemed two-dimensional. Some of them were three-dimensional on some of the craft. On this craft, they had some of both. They had some three-dimensional gauges, then they had the two-dimensional gauges. This one also had switches. Those switches were black. And
like a
toggle switch.
A toggle switch.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that was all about. In the center between the two panels, you had a large screen, and I'm pretty sure that was to view maybe the ground. Now you could see outside of the cockpit, but this large screen, it could be for surveillance on the ground or something like that. I'm quite sure they had a setup that was similar to us taking photographs, taking pictures, but from their technology and from their perspective. None of it was operational when we went aboard the craft. Why it was there, it was intact, but there was no entities, no bodies.
What was the shape of the craft?
This craft was more like an egg-shaped craft because it was, larger in front, then it curved to the back.
What dimensions are we looking at?
Right here, we're looking at a craft that's probably about 30, 35 foot long and maybe 12 to 15 foot tall.
What other shapes of craft have you seen in the past?
I saw a cigar-shaped craft. I did not have the privilege of going in it. I had to stay out. There was an opening and there were people going in and out, but they had specific tasking to do. There have been other craft that appear to be like, I don't know how to put this, but lens-shaped craft.
And did you notice anything in particular about all the crafts that maybe had something in common?
Not that I can recall. The, shall I say, battleship gray or whatever was a commonality among all of them. I mean, they wasn't looking to go ahead and have spectacular colors, things of this sort. The lights that they had wasn't like the lights that we have on our craft. They didn't really need the lights. The lights actually served a purpose of aiding in their mode of propulsion. And I can't explain that because I actually ask, okay, why is it they have sometimes blue lights, sometimes red and blue lights, sometimes just white lights? And the way the colonel thought and explained it to me, says, well, I guess I can tell you that the lights have nothing to do with letting other craft that might be around them know that they're there. It has everything to do with their propulsion system.